We spoke in part one of this Dvar Torah about Betzalel and Ohaliav, the two main builders of the Mishkan, and we spoke about from a perspective of their individual characters. First off, from their names, the Kli Yakar, and then we went a little bit into Betzalel and his individual character traits. In this part of the Dvar Torah, I want to try to zoom out a little bit and speak a little bit more about their tribes, where they come from. Although we're going to see when it comes to Dan as a tribe actually has a lot of koch of the individual in there as well. There's less groupthink in the tribe of Dan, but let's speak a little bit now in a bit more zoomed out perspective. So the Torah focuses on the tribes they come from. We already said in Parshat Kitisa, in Parshat Vayakel, and Parshat Pekudei, each of the parashas go out of the way to tell us not only their lineage, but also that Betzalel comes from Matei Yehuda, that he comes from the tribe of Yehuda, and Ohaliav comes from the tribe of Dan. So why is it important for us to know that one is from Shevet Yehuda and one is from Shevet Dan? Why is tribal affiliation why is it dafka written over and over again in our parashiot? Question number two, is there a significance in this partnership between the tribe of Yehuda and the tribe of Dan? Why dafka these two tribes? Okay, so let's start off with Rashi. This is Rashi back in Perek Lamed Hey, Pasuk Lamed Daled. He's going on Ohaliav. Who is this guy Ohaliav? Mishevet Dan. He comes from the tribe of Dan. Min hayerudin shebashvatim. Remember these words. Min hayerudin shebashvatim. He comes from the lowest of the tribes, from the lower tribes. He's from the lower. According to what Rashi's learning over here, there's a hierarchy. It seems to be in spirituality. Maybe it's talking about more physical, but I don't think it's talking about finances over here. But we have ourselves the lowest of the tribes, or one of the lowest of the tribes. We have ourselves Shevet Dan. He's the Yerudin Shebashvatim. Mi Benei Ashfachot. He comes from the maidservants. So it seems to over here some of the hierarchy has to do with pedigree. Who's your mother? Is it directly Rachel or Leah, or is it from Bilhah and Zilpah? Dan is the first of the children of the maidservants. He's the first of the children of Bilhah. His full brother will be Naphtali. We'll get to Naphtali maybe a little bit in this Dvar Torah as well. וישבהו המקום לבצלאל למלאכת המשכן והוא מגדולי השבטים לקיים מה שנאמר ולא ניכר שואה לפני דל. He says, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu equalized him. He brought him up. He shavahu to Betzalel. He made Ohaliav equal to Betzalel. He brought him up to the level of Betzalel. Betzalel, when it comes to building Hashem's home, building the Mishkan, Betzalel comes from the Gdolei Ashvatim. He's one of the most noble of the tribes. The Yehuda is Yehuda. Why? Yehuda is the leader. It's the Mashiach ben David. It's the tribe of the lion. He took Ohaliav, who comes from one of the lowest tribes, and brings him up to one of the highest tribes. From down below up to on top. It seems to be from this Rashi, they take it extreme. The lowest, the low, up to the highest of the high. And why? To teach us the halacha that we learn in Iyov that Hashem does not play favorites. The rich versus the poor. May here, the richest of the tribes, being the greatest of the tribes, the Yehuda, from the lowest of the tribes, Dan. Hashem doesn't play favorites. You can come from the lowest tribe Dan and still step it up. As we mentioned in part one of this Dvar Torah, if you're Chacham Lev, if you desire with your heart HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you can come from the lowest Dan, and be elevated to be equal, Shivau, to the tribes of Yehuda. Says Rav Tzadok HaKohen in Taknat HaShavin, page 48, a little bit mystically, says that Yehuda, the Yehuda-Dan connection, the lowest with the highest, is actually a symbol for the Messianic era, which he calls Midat HaIgulim. We spoke about this back on Simchat Torah time. It's the level of the circle, where the lowest end of the line, normally we have the Yashar, the line, but we take the lowest end of the line, and we now connect it into a circle. So the end, the lowest end, Dan, now connects to the top of the line to Yehuda, makes a circle, so the Rosh and the Sof are now mechubar, they become yachad, they become one, and that's the period of the Messianic era. We're all together standing in a circle with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, equidistant from everybody. Right there in the middle, we have over here with Yehuda and Dan coming together, we have ourselves a little bit of the Messianic era. Okay. Slightly more nuanced, some of the Hasidic masters explain that to build the Beit Hashem, you need the holy energy from the bottom, just like the top. You have to get from the top of the tribes, Yehuda, and the lowest, the low, we need their energy too. We need the lowly Dan to help build the temple, to really complete the house of Hashem for all the whole Jewish people. And sometimes from that lowest level, the Hasidic thought, from down below, the lower you go, if you can bring that up as well, that's going to make for some of the greatest levels of Kedusha. We need the lowest with the highest built together. Moreover, we're going to see in a second that Dan actually played a bigger role in inspiring the Egel HaZahav, that level of idolatry of the Jewish people, and they had a bigger role than the other tribes. So it could be that they're actually very crucial for the Tikkun as well. That we spoke on the one angle, Betzalel, last Dvar Torah, part one, Betzalel is able to conquer his anger for the murder of his father, conquer his midot, and be this great Chacham Lev, this great desirer of God, this great Mevakesh. Well, we also need the sinner himself to do tshuva. And if Dan was the inspiration for the Egel, we need him to be part of the Tikkun as well, and that could be another aspect for why we dafka have to have Ohaliav from the tribe of Dan involved to make the tikkun. But Rashi is explaining a lot simpler. Rashi is saying that even a person from the tribe of Dan, which is from the lowest, if he has a deep desire, then he'll have the zechut to serve Hashem because it's a meritocracy. It's based on your desire. And if your merit is there, if you have the right, then you're going to get up there. It's not based off of pedigree, it's based off of your desire. And therefore he's saying that stop with the complaints. Oh, I come from these low beginnings. I come from a poor family, a non-religious family. I didn't learn properly, and my high school never taught me. My family never taught me. It was so different. Stop all that stuff. If you're L'Shem Shamayim and you're willing to step it up, you get your way up to become the second in command. Ohaliav, from the lowest of beginnings, steps it up and builds the house of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But now, where did this concept of the spiritual levels of the tribes, where did it actually derive from? Where do we first see these things? So says Rab Nebenzahl, this is a sikh on the parasha, in Parashat Bamidbar, which speaks about the formations of the tribes, where we place them in connection to the Mishkan. So he says over there that Yehuda and Dan's spiritual levels are reflected in the order of how the tribes traveled in the desert, as described in that parasha. So how did it work? The tribes were divided. We have 12 tribes divided into 4 groups. Levi actually was divided by family all around the Mishkan on each side, based on the family, and then we had ourselves, Ephraim and Menashe split into 2, and those 12 tribes now get split into 4 groups of 3. Yehuda is on the east side. He's the leader of the group. They're traveling east towards Eretz Yisrael. East is always straight, is always forward in the Torah. So Yehuda is leading the first group of 3 tribes towards Eretz Yisrael. He's the leader of the pack. And then in a clockwise order, we go around the Mishkan. The south side is led by the Bachor, led by Reuven. Then we go to the west side, being led by Ephraim. That's that Mashiach ben Yosef character. And then we go to the very north. The north is led by Shevet Dan. And Dan is the last one to lead the group. And as Pasuk says over there, this is in Bamidbar, Perak Bet, Pasuk Lamed Aleph, end of the Pasuk, La'achorna, Yisu L'diglehem, the tribe of Dan, Kol Pekudim L'chad Dan. Dan will be the last one, La'achorna, Yisau. They're going to be the last one to march, or they're going to lead the last group of 3 in the march to Eretz Yisrael. Okay. And Lanut Dati, I was actually thinking that we see Rav Tzadok's circle idea very clearly just in their formation. Because while there's 4 sets of 3 tribes that are in a clockwise motion, and Yehuda in the east travels first, and Dan in the north travels last, but when they actually settle down, when they come to camp, and we're going to see in the land of Israel, it's going to take place in the Nachala as well, when they actually settle down, they're right next to each other. Because the east is right next to the north, Dan is right next to Yehuda, when they actually stop traveling. So Dan travels last, but ultimately in the circle concept, Dan is right next to Yehuda. Now, says Rab Nebenzahl, by the time we get to Sefer Bamidbar, Hashem has established this order. But he says, if you look at earlier parts of the Torah, we actually see that Dan was always meant to be in the back of the bus. He was always supposed to lead in the back, and Yehuda was always supposed to be in the front. Where do we see that? So first off, we have the famous story of the splitting of the sea. When the Jewish people are leaving Egypt, we're being freed from slavery. It's Yat Mitzrayim. We get to the Yam Suf, we get to the water, and then what happens? The water is stopping us. Who runs in first to split the sea? Nachshon ben Aminadav. We have ourselves Nachshon from the tribe of Yehuda is the first guy to jump in. Nachshon is the leader of Yehuda. He's leading the Jewish people already into the sea first. Moreover, we find Yehuda himself was already the leader of the Jewish people back in Sefer Bereshit. In Vayigash Yehuda, when Yehuda is seen as the Jewish leader to step it up to try to save his brother Binyamin. He says Yehuda over there is facing this leader of Egypt, this Tzafnat Paneach, the number 2 guy, Paro's number 2, and who's threatening to take Binyamin hostage. And we know that this Egyptian Tzafnat Paneach is really Yosef HaTzadik, but Yehuda thinks he's taking on all of Mitzrayim. So when it says Vayigash Yehuda, he's stepping it up to try to fight against this king of Egypt. Actually, a few psukim earlier, the pasuk says, "Vayavo Yehuda ve'echav." It says Yehuda and his brothers come to Egypt. We already see that over here. Yehuda is singled out as being the leader of the Jewish people. It's no longer all the achim together. It's Yehuda ve'echav. Yehuda is now the leader of the Jewish people. Actually, we saw it earlier hinted to in the negative that Yehuda was the one who had the original idea to sell Yosef, and everybody listened to him. So Yehuda always had his leadership capabilities, but Vayavo Yehuda ve'echav, Vayigash Yehuda, when they finally face against Yosef, Yehuda is stepping it up as that leader. He always wanted to be the leader. He's the Nachshon that's jumping it in first. Yehuda is the tribe of David HaMelech, the tribe of Shlomo HaMelech. They're going to be the first kings. They're going to be the builders. Shlomo HaMelech is going to build the first Beit HaMikdash, and they're going to be the tribe, as we know, of Mashiach ben David. This is the tribe of the Mashiach. Dan, on the other hand, spent his time hanging out in the back of the bus. They were the last tribe to cross through the Yam Suf. The Targum Yonatan tells us that all the other tribes traveled. They were the last one, and they actually were carrying with them the Avodah Zarah of Pesel Mika. They were actually carrying Avodah Zarah. This is the reason why the angel in the Shamayim said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, these guys are sinners. These guys are of the Avodah Zarah. Those are the Avodah Zarah. Why are you saying the Jewish people? They're sinners just like the Egyptians. Well, who are the of the Avodah Zarah he's referring to? So according to Chazal, according to the Targum, it's referring to Dan, who was carrying with him Avodah Zarah as they crossed through the sea, and that's why he's the inspiration for the Avodah Zarah of the Egel, because he's the first tribe to already to already do Avodah Zarah, and therefore, as we mentioned, Dan has to be part of the Tikkun of the Egel because they themselves were the first one to inspire Avodah Zarah, and the Jewish people just left Egypt. Now, I saw an awesome Gaon Mivilna. It's brought down in the name of the Gaon Mivilna. This dealing with the splitting of the sea and the actual role of Dan with the Avodah Zarah. So if we go back to Perek Kaf Bet, starting with Pasuk Kaftet, so there the Torah speaks about the Jewish people crossing through the Yam Suf. And the first Pasuk says, Ubau b'nei Yisrael betoch hayam bayabasha v'amayim lahem choma miminam umisemolam. And b'nei Yisrael were crossing through, it says, the ocean and the sea, and the water was for them a choma, it was like a wall, miyaminam umisemolam, on the right side and on the left side. So it says, look at the order of what takes place. They walk into the water and into the dry land, and the water was like a choma, it split and became walls that they can walk through. And then the psukim go on by Devu Mitzrayim, and the Egyptians chase after them, and ultimately they make it through. And at the end of the story, it says over there that vayashuvu hamayim vayachusu et harechav, the water comes back. Ubnei Yisrael halchu bayabasha betoch hayam. And Bnei Israel, they went through the Yabasha, through the dry ground that was Betoch Hayam. Here, it was flipped. The first time it says they went through the Yam and the Yabasha. Now it says they went by Yabasha Betoch Hayam, the dry land in the Yam. So Chazal are bothered. Why the switch? Why was it first Yam Yabasha and now it's Yabasha Yam? And then it says V'amayim lahem choma miminam u'misemolam, and now again it repeats, and the water was for them a wall on the right and on the left. But this time the word choma, the word wall, it formed a wall, is missing the letter Vav. And when the word choma without the letter Vav could also be read as the word chema, as anger. Okay, so with that background, we can now understand the words of the Gra. Let's read the words of the Gra inside. Says the pasuk, Betoch hayam bayabasha. The first pasuk says they first went into the Yam, into the Yabasha. Ulehal b'pasuk kaftet kativ v'nei Yisrael b'yabasha betoch hayam. He says, V'yesh leva'er. Amai shinoi lashon. Why the change? Why originally was it water betoch hayam bayabasha, and only afterwards bayabasha betoch hayam? And he also asks, why the double lashon? Why mention twice the going into the water? That the water was a choma. So he says that Shamati, I heard from the great Arav Hai Gaon, I heard from the great Rabbi, the Gaon Mivilna, that also, look a little bit closer. Also, why is the word choma im vav? Why is it spelled with a vav the first time? And why is it spelled chema without a vav? Why is choma? It's still pronounced choma, but why is it missing the vav? So he says as follows. Everything makes sense. He says, everything makes sense. Why? He says there were two sections in the Jewish people. Achat anashim tzadikim. One was tzadikim, ma'aminim, b'Hashem, believers, ba'alei bitachon, halchu techech bayam, ad ki ba'u mayim ad hanevesh. And they went right into the water until it reached up to their souls. K'di'ita b'midrash, tekafaz Nachshon barishon letoch hayam. As we mentioned, who was the first one to travel first? Nachshon ben Aminadav. He jumped into the water. And that's why it starts off, and that's why he merited to be the first of the Nesi'im. And then afterwards, Yehuda followed after him. And the Midrash says, "The shalu b'shamayim, and they asked the angels, why are these Jews different from those? The Mitzrayim tavu bayam, b'nei Yisrael, and the Mitzrayim are being drowned in the water, and b'nei Yisrael, they get to be saved. They can walk through the dry land. Halalu of the Avodah Zarah, halalu of the Azara. They're both of the Avodah Zarah. V'ashir lehem Hashem yitbarach, and Hashem answered them, zechuta emunah v'bitachon kedai lehem. It's their emunah and their bitachon, their belief in God, that was was worth it. Im ken ati shapir, therefore it makes a lot of sense. Tichtiv gabei Yisrael shachu b'toch hayam mikodem emunah bitachon. So that's why the very first pasuk says they went first into the water with full emunah. This is Nachshon ben Aminadab, the tribe of Yehuda, jumping directly into the water up until his nefesh, about to die. And only afterwards was it by Yabasha, because it didn't become dry until he jumped in. Shapir avu lehem amayim choma, and that's why the water became a choma. Mamash kechoma. It was like he jumped into a wall with the letter Vav, and he jumped in, and then it split. So that's why it's Yam, Yabasha, and Choma. Aval. But Hakat Shniya, the second group of Jews, they didn't have that same level of belief. They weren't going in until they saw the dry land. And that's why by them, at the end of the pasuk, it says they went into the Yabasha betoch hayam. First, they had to see the Yabasha, and only afterwards they would go into it, and then only afterwards it would go back to being water. And that's why the water was chema. It was a choma without the letter vav. And that's what the Midrash says. That's the anger, the chema of the angels of Amru. Why are these guys different? The gam emunah ein lahem. They don't even have emunah. So why are you saving them? Okay, that is the first approach. Brought down in the name of the Gaon of Vilna. Now there's a second approach, Mipi Shmua. There's a second approach of the Gaon of Vilna, which takes it even further. It's going to relate it back to us and even to the tribe of Dan. V'hamayim lahem choma. Okay, kan kativ choma maleh. Here we have a vav. In the first pasuk we have the vav again. Same question. And later on it says the word choma as chema without the vav. Why? So he says as follows. Mishum de'ita, because the Midrash and Shmot Rabbah tells us, Shepeshel Mika avar imahem bayam. The pestle of Mika was with them in the water, as Chazal learned. V'avar bayam tzara, and they had tzara with them. They had avodah zara. Okay, fine. Now. Says the Shmuah, don't say Mika directly. Mika, Pesel Mika is going to be this theme in the Navi. Was actual Avodah Zarah called Pesel Mika. So he says, Velosha Pesel Abatzmo Avar Imahem, Ki Pesel Nasa B'Yemei Shoftim. It's not the actual Pesel Mika that we find in Navi, because that was only made in the times of the Navi. So here it's saying, don't take the Midrashim always so literally. Acha Kavana Shemachshavatam Hayta L'Avodah Zarah. Rather, they were in the level of the Machshavav Avodah Zarah, U'Avodah Zarah, Kadosh Baruch Hu when it comes to Avodah Zarah, as opposed to other sins where actions need to be done in order to actually get the punishment, when it comes to Avodah Zarah, it's one of the few, I think it's the only sin where Hashem actually pays attention to the machshava as well, and he makes machshava like ma'aseh. So therefore, they had this machshava of Avodah Zarah, and that is equal to having the pesel Mika with them. V'yadua sheshevet Dan halach b'achrona shene'emar ma'asef l'kol ha'machanot. And we know that Dan was the last one to travel, as he's called the ma'asef l'kol ha'machanot. We'll get to this in a second in Rav Neben Sal as well. But Dan was the last one to travel, as he was the one that gathered all the stuff that got lost along the way. Pasuk says he's the last one to actually travel. So who's the one in the back with the Avodah Zarah? It's Dan. He's in the back literally, but he's also in the back spiritually. And he continues that even though we don't find out about the actual orders until Sefer Bamidbar, there was always this Masorah they had who would travel where. That the Midrashim even go back to say they even were traveling in these formations already when they were taking Yaakov Avinu's body back for burial in the land of Israel. And with this, we can close up the Gaon of Vilna that all the words make perfect sense, because in the beginning it says that the Jewish people were betoch hayam bayabasha. That's the ones that had the Amunah, who jumped in first, and Dan is still on the outside. The Avodah Zarah didn't make it in yet. But then, as the first corner, as the Yehuda corner starts to leave, eventually the Dan who's the back starts to come in. So that's why now the second pasuk it says Yabasha bayam, because the Yabasha people are the first people that already left. And who's left in the Yam? Dan is left in the Yam. Now, Dan is left in the Yam. The first time when Yehuda went in, it said Choma. It was good walls that protected them as they went through. It split through. But now it says the language of Choma without the Vav, the Chema, because now we have actual anger, because now there's Avodah Zarah inside the Yam Suf. Okay, so that's the Gaon of Vilna, really expanding on that Targum Yonatan. Let's go back to the Targum Yonatan, because the Targum Yonatan, as well as the Midrashim, they actually find three other times that we have this negativity of Dan in the Chumash, and this Dan being in the back, being spit out. Okay, what happens? Let's fast forward to the next one. Targum Yonatan tells us that when Amalek attacked the people down below, we spoke about in the beginning of our Dvar Torah, in part 1, we spoke about Amalek attacking. Who were they attacking? The people that were spit out of the clouds. They were speaking the Nechashalim, the weak ones. So sometimes we learn it as the weak ones physically, the women and children. Other times we learn it as the weak ones spiritually. Who's the weak ones spiritually? So some Chazal learn it as the Eruv Rab. It's those converts, those non-Jews that had joined along the way, who according at least to Kabbalistic literature made a lot of balagan along the way, even though we have to fight for them too. And according to this other approach, according to the Targum Yonatan, it's also Shevet Dan. Now, interestingly, Shevet Dan and the Eruv Rav, they actually hung out a lot together. We're going to see in a minute that Dan and the non-Jews actually have a lot of connections and a lot of times in the Torah. But according to the Targum, it's Shevet Dan that was spit out of the clouds because he had that Avodah Zarah. So that Avodah Zarah that he had in the splitting of the sea, this Avodah Zarah now makes it. He's spit out of the clouds, which now makes him vulnerable for this war of Amalek. So if we mention the prototypes of Moshe, the Torah, Yoshua, Mashiach ben Yosef, of Chur, Mashiach ben David, Aaron the Kohen Gadol, so Dan is there as well. We have Dan is there as well. In this case, symbolizing the weaker ones of the Jewish people. Dan is down below. Rabbi Khan actually mentioned once that we have the war against Amalek. So Chazal teaches that it's the Bnei Rachel that are the ones that are going to fight against Esav and Amalek. So that's why over here we have Leah kids on top of the mountain, the Moshe, the Hur, the Aaron, the Yehudas, the Levis, they're on top, while the Rachel kids are down below, because we have Yoshua, who's from Ephraim, Yosef, the full child of Rachel, and then we have Dan, who comes from Rachel's maidservant in the war against Amalek. So we have ourselves down below, and when we're dealing with Amalek, we have the Rachel kids and the Rachel extended kids as well. And we also learn from here that Jews have a responsibility to fight for even the lowest Jews, even the lowest of the tribes, even the Ovdei Avodah Zarah, even the sinners, even the Eruv Rav. We got to go out there, and even though they're rejected, they're lost, they don't have the protection of Hashem anymore. Hashem kicked them out of the clouds, but still, despite their idolatrous machshavot, despite their sins, we still have to fight for them. And that's we also learn this, that Yoshua, Mashiach ben Yosef, is going to go and fight for those Danites, for those Eruv Ravs as well. B'ezrat Hashem, maybe in a future Dvar Torah, we're going to dwell a little bit more on this concept of the kids of Rachel, of defeating Esav throughout history, through the future as well. And actually, you can private message me, and I'll send you over last year's Dvar Torah about Amalek and Dan and the 54 connection, the 54 Hamans and the 54 Esthers in the Megillah, Gematria Dan, the hidden Dan in the Purim story as well. Okay, Dan messes up 2 more times according to the Targum Yonatan. The Targum tells us that in the story of the Mitonanim, when we get to Sefer Bamidbar, we're going to have a bunch of sins of the Jewish people. One is going to be the Mitonanim, the complainers. Targum Yonatan says, who are the complainers? Shevet Dan. And the Targum also tells us that when Bilam HaRasha wanted to curse the Jewish people, he thought that he could actually curse. What was the Hava Aminah? Why did he think he would have the ability to curse the Jewish people? Because he saw that Dan was outside of the clouds. He didn't have that protection because of his Avodah Zarah, and therefore Bilam thought he can curse everybody. So we see ourselves, Dan seems to always be on the outside. So let's go back to now Rav Nebensal. Says Rav Nebensal, Hashem tzilecha. Hashem is our shadow. Hashem reflects where we want to be. If we want to seek out HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if we want to be up close, we'll be up close. If we want to be far away, we're going to be far away. Yehuda desired leadership. He traveled first. Dan traveled in the back by the Yam Suf. He was in the back with the Eruv Rav. Therefore, where's his position? His position is going to be in the back. Hashem made their position as they traveled based on where their desire was. And we're going to see that history is going to repeat itself. Because Dan initially is going to be given property, area, territory, is Nachalah, is going to be in the Merkaz of Israel. It's going to be in Gush Dan, in the Tel Aviv area, right next to Yerushalayim, right next to, again, when you settle down, Dan is next to Yehuda, but ultimately they're not going to be able to hold it, and he goes to where he seems to be he belongs. He goes up to the north. He goes up to the northern border. Dan is going to go up to the Golan. It's not so clear from the text that the Kadosh Baruch Hu always have Dan and the Bashan. Look at Yaakov's blessed. Look at the story of Avraham. It could be that this was always part of Dan's plans to have 2 sections in Israel, but according to a simple interpretation, Dan couldn't hold on to the Tel Aviv area. He was like a Swiss cheese piece of land amongst the Yehuda people. So ultimately, he goes up to the Golan, he goes up to the Bashan, he goes up to the border of Syria, to an area today called Tel Dan, an area that he called Leshem after a stone, and up there in the border of Syria, we see that he's opened up to even more non-Jewish influences. It's gonna, and we're gonna talk about that a little bit more when we go a little deeper into what Dan is really all about. But it doesn't matter. Even when he was in Gush Dan, even when he was in the Dan area, when he was in the area not too far from Beit Shemesh, he's ultimately we have the story of Shimshon. We'll get into where he marries a Philistine woman. He seems to be mixing with the non-Jews. We always have Dan seems to be a lot more of an interesting character when it comes to non-Jews. Okay, but in the bigger picture, Yehuda is always first and Dan is always last. Even when they go down to Egypt, who goes down first to Egypt? Yehuda goes down first to set up Goshen, set up the yeshivas, and according to at least one opinion in Chazal, we're always trying to figure out who is that 70th person that goes down to Egypt. So one opinion is the 70th person to go down was Hushim ben Dan. Dan's son Hushim is the last guy to go down. And sadly, when it comes to Avodah Zarah is not only part of Dan in the desert. Dan's future as well is going to have a couple stories of Avodah Zarah. In the Navi, we find the story of the Pesel Micha. We have the story of the Avodah Zarah that's taken into Dan's territory. Sadly, in that story as well, is also a Moshe prototype as well, or a negative Moshe prototype. There's a guy named Yehonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe. The Nun is a little bit lower. Chazal tells us it might even be Moshe's descendant himself. Get rid of the Nun and have ourselves the grandson of Moshe. He actually goes from being an Ish Levi to being a fake Kohen Gadol, but this is the Avodah Zarah that is in Dan's territory. Then later on, in the times of Yeravam is the negative Yosef, the Mashiach ben Yosef prototype, the negative version. The Avodah Zarah would again return to the territory of Dan, as Yeravam is going to build 2 egos to try to stop the people from going to Yerushalayim, and one of those egos will be in the north in Dan's territory. Actually, in fact, Rashi already told us that this was going to happen, because in Sefer Bereshit it speaks about Avraham chasing after, pursuing the 4 evil kings, and ultimately he can't go any further when he gets to the place called Dan. Here's also one of the hints that Dan's territory was always supposed to be part in the north. When Avraham gets to the area of Dan, Tashash Kocho, he became very weak. Why did he become weak? Says Rashi, he became weak because he saw in the future Avodah Zarah was going to be in this territory, and that made him too weak to continue his war against the 4 kings, and he stops right there. Now, in fact, we spoke a couple of years ago, we gave a Dvar Torah that discusses that Avram felt a deep responsibility to try to make a tikkun for Dan. Dan, the sinner, Dan, the Avodah Zarah. Avram felt that maybe he can do something for him. Now, we already mentioned that the stones of Dan weren't in the Garden of Eden. There actually is an idea, the 12 stones on the breastplate, the Choshen, the 12 stones correspond to 12 tribes. And if you go to the Navi discusses 9 stones that were in the Garden of Eden. 9 of the stones correspond to 9 out of 12 stones. But there's 3 stones that are missing. Which 3 stones? The 3 stones that start with Dan's stones and the 2 other stones that follow him. Meaning Dan leads a group of 3 tribes, so Dan's stones lead the 3 stones of Leshem, Shevon, Achlama. Leshem is the name of the stone of Dan. He's going to name the territory in the north that he conquers, Leshem. So Dan's 3 stones, or the 3 stones that correspond to Dan and his 3 tribes, is Leshem, Shevon, Achlama. It says that Avram Avinu went down to Be'er Sheva and he planted an Eshel tree. What is Eshel tree? Eshel tree is Aleph, Shin, Lamed. Those are the letters of the Lamed, the Shin, and the Aleph. Leshem, Shevon, Achlama. Avram is planting the Eshel tree. He's trying to plant Dan's stones back in. Interesting also, he's in Be'er Sheva, and it's not in Hebron, it's Be'er Sheva. Be'er Sheva is closer in the south to where the Plishtim lived in the times of the Torah. Dan is associated with the Plishtim area. In the times of the Navi, it's going to be the Plishtim in the area of Gaza, but Dan is in that area as well. So Avram is planting the Eshel tree, Aleph, Shin, Lamed. It's the Leshem, Shevon, the Achlama, the 3 stones. Avraham is trying to fix Dan, get his stones into the Garden of Eden. Let's plant those trees, the trees of the garden. Let's get the tree of Dan as well inside the Garden of Eden. Okay. Dan is seen by Chazal as associated with darkness, with the Yetzer Hara. His location when traveling, he's the north tribe. The north 3 comes from Dan. The Nevi'im tell us that from the north, that's where all the bad comes from. The north is the cold, it's the darkness. Says Yirmiyahu, Perek Aleph, Pasuk Yudalet. Vayomer Adonai Elai. God said, Mitzafon tipatach hara'a al kol yoshvei haaretz. Disaster. The Ra'ah, it's all going to come from the north. It's going to have all the inhabitants of Eretz Yisrael. It's going to be affected from the north. Dan is the one, that northern border. Dan is the one traveling in the north. The north, Amalek attacks us in the desert from the north. Darkness is greater in the north, and the sun goes from east to west. It travels in the southern route, therefore it's darker, it's colder. According to the Arizal, the month of Tevet, that's the dark month of Tevet of the winter, that's the month of Dan. Actually, I read a different Dvar Torah from Moshe Wolfson that he says that really Dan is Tevet, except when in the exile. When you're in the exile, Dan is the last month to travel, so therefore he'd be the month of Adar, as another Dan Purim connection. Maybe we'll speak about that in a future year. Side idea, I was actually listening to an idea from Aryeh Leibowitz from my neighborhood, and he actually brought down a Gemara in Shabbat, Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph, which speaks about sheep and goats. He was talking about Tevet, and apparently Tevet, in the mystical literature, he quoted a Gra, Tevet is associated with the goat, interestingly enough, and we're saying Tevet is associated with the Shevet Dan. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Zera ishkach le Rabbi Yehuda dahave kai apitcha debei chamua. He said Rabbi Zera came to visit Rabbi Yehuda, who was standing at the entrance of his father-in-law's house. And he observed that he was in a very cheerful mood. So Rabbi Zera, realizing that if Rabbi Yehuda is very happy right now, this is an opportunity. So the Gemara says, he says, I could ask him anything in the entire world right now, and he's going to answer. Rabbi Yehuda's in a good mood. So he asked him a wild question, which you can only understand with mystical, and you can really only understand this with mystical thought. Amar le, he said to him, he says, why do goats walk in front of the flock, and then the sheep and then they follow after? Why do the goats follow first? Amar le kibriyato shel olam debereisha chashocha v'hadar nehora. He says it's like the creation of the world. So Rabbi Yehuda answers him, where at first it's dark and then the light comes out. And goats, which are typically black and darker, they're going to precede the white sheep. So goats come before sheep, and therefore now we're going to say that mystically, the Gemara speaks about this being messianic times, relating the goats to the Seir, to the Esavs of the world. But we know Dan is going to be the one that's going to fight against Esav. We'll get to it pretty soon. So Dan is this goat. Dan is going to come first. Dan is going to be the one to lead us back in messianic era. It's going to be Shevet Dan, who corresponds to Tevet, who corresponds to the goat, the darkness from the north. That's going to be the first one to lead us out. He's going to be the first one to go into the Galut, because we're going to go into the Galut when we're going to be attacked from Ashur in the north. The Assyrians are going to come up in the north by that Syrian border where Dan was. So they're going to be the first one to go into Galut, but they're going to be La'achorna Yisrael. They're going to be the last ones to travel, meaning in the end of days, they're going to be the first one to travel. They're going to be the goats, and then Vayi'erev, Vayiboker, we're going to go from darkness to light. We're going to start with that night, but Dan is going to be the one to lead us into that daytime, into that darkness, as we're going to discuss in a later part of this Dvar Torah. Okay. But back to our Rav Betzalel, back to our Rashi. Rashi is telling us that despite Dan's low level, the tribal group can't hold you back. And Ohaliav steps it up. It's a meritocracy. He desires Chacham Lev. He wants to build that real bite for Kadosh Baruch Hu. He has the teshukah. He has the desire. So therefore, he's going to be second to only Betzalel, who we spoke about in the first recording, that Betzalel, coming from Chur, has to be the biggest Baal Ratzon if he wants to build a Mishkan, despite his grandfather being murdered. So now Ohaliav is from the tribe of Dan, really wants it too. So he joins Yehuda in this great endeavor of building the Beit HaMikdash. And we see it's not building the Mishkan. And we see it's not only the Mishkan, but even in times of the first Beit HaMikdash. So when Shlomo HaMelech, who's from the tribe of Yehuda, he's literally the Ben David, when he wants to build a Beit HaMikdash, he's looking for help. So he finds help from one guy named Hiram, who's a non-Jew from Tzur, but he finds help from another guy named Hiram, who is Jewish. Who's the Jewish guy, Hiram, that helps him? The guy that helps him is, this says Chazal, or based on the Pesukim in different Navis, there's a stira between Divrei Yamim and earlier, but he says that his mother was from the tribe of Dan, and Traba from the tribe, and the father from the tribe of Naphtali. Says guy Hiram is from Bilhah's other son. Bilhah has two kids, Naphtali and Dan. The father Naphtali is going to be the side of this Hiram from the father, and the mother Dan. So this guy Hiram, whose mother is from Dan. Again, we have Dan building the Mishkan. Now, Rabbi Betzalel closes by saying that despite Dan's low positioning in the people when they traveled, Hashem gave him a special zechut. He gave him a special job, and this job is going to be a merit, a mitzvah, that's going to help bring about the tikkun. Because says Rabbi Betzalel, says the pasuk, Dan is labeled as the ma'asef l'kol ha'machanot. The pasuk in Bamidbar Perek Yud, pasuk Kafei says, "V'nisad degel machaneh b'nei Dan me'asef l'kol ha'machanot l'tzivotam v'al tzeba'o Achiezer ben Amishadai." When speaking about the travels, it says Dan, the degel of Dan, the tribe of Dan, was leading the back of the bus. They are leading the three groups. They are known as Ma'asef L'Kol HaMachanot. They're going to gather in. They're the gatherer of all the people. And the person in charge of them, of the tribe, in those days was called Achiezer ben Amishadai. Look at the name Achiezer ben Amishadai. Again, Achiezer, like Achisamach. Achiezer, he helps his brother. Ben Amishadai, we're bringing in that name of God, Betzalel, the name of Kel, which they relate to Shaddai in other ways as well. I'm in the Midrashim. But we have Achiezer ben Amishadai. He has the nation. He has the love of his nation. We have the name of God over here. We have ourselves Dan as Ma'asef L'Kol HaMachanot. What does it mean, Ma'asef L'Kol HaMachanot? Says Rashi. Talmud Yerushalmi, Lefi she'aya shivto shel Dan meruba be'uchlosim. Since Dan was so great in number, they were very large in number. The only tribe to have more people than Dan was Yehuda. Interestingly enough, Dan was second in large numbers. Haya nosea ba'achrona ve'kol mi she'aya me'abed davar haya machziro lo. Anybody who forgot anything, Dan would bring it back to them and return it to them. And says Rav Betzalel that despite their avodah zarah making a major kitrug against the whole Jewish people and bringing about a war of Amalek against the Jewish people, ultimately Hashem put them in the back to help the people, to bring back the lost objects, and that will create unity, that will create achdut, and maybe that will bring about a tikkun. So that is Rav Betzalel. Bezrat Hashem, in the next part, in part 3, I want to look a little bit deeper into this unity of Dan and Yehuda and how they're going to be the seeds that are going to be planted to create the Messianic era.